Hey all, Mark Mobus here, the Alberta Paramedic Association podcast. Today we're going to talk to Clinton Marquardt. He is the expert in fatigue and sleep for all of Canada. In fact, he is such an expert that he serves as the only expert witness for the Supreme Court of Canada in sleep and fatigue related motor vehicle incidents. He consults with rail lines, pilots. You know what? Go to his website and check him out at sleepanddreams.com. Today we are going to talk about everything from the science of sleep, the science of dreams, how to get a better night's sleep. We're going to talk about shift patterns. Oh man, we got all sorts of stuff to talk about. And at the end of the podcast, I wind up going on quite a long rant. So stick with us. That rant is all about what the association is doing with CoreFlex, how CoreFlex is empirically harmful to paramedics, the risk to the communities, some of the work we're doing with municipalities. I will warn you right now, though, I definitely got on my soapbox. I'm sorry, all right? I'm passionate about it. But hey, have a listen. I think you're going to enjoy this. One thing I gotta ask you right off the bat is, how do you become the sleep and fatigue specialist recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada as the only expert witness in sleep and fatigue for all of Canada? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's been about 30 years in the making, actually. So I'm one of these guys that knows a little bit about sleep and fatigue and not much about anything else. So I started my interest in the sleep world way back in grade school, actually, and where one of my interests was dreams. And I never really read novels. I was always reading books on dreams. And in university, I said, well, who studies dreams? And psychologists. So I took psychology and then very quickly learned that dreams occur during sleep. So I wanted to learn more. I had to learn about sleep. So throughout all of university, I focused on kind of let the dream side go, but focused more on sleep and the outcomes of poor sleep. From there, started working in the sleep disorder centers in the sleep clinics. So a good clinical background, which I might be able to relate to some of your audience in the paramedicine field. Never worked as a paramedic, but I've got a couple of paramedic clients, organizations. I've been speaking with you guys for a number of years, so I'm starting to get to know the industry a little bit. After that, I went on to do some consulting work. And the consulting work I did with actually one of my first consulting contracts was to help the Ottawa ambulance services redesign their shift schedule. So this was probably in the early 90s. From there, the TSB, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, was having some troubles with investigating fatigue. I'm not sure if you know much about the Transportation Safety Board, but the way it's set up is they have modal groups. So they've got divisions or departments or investigation sort of directorates, and they investigate aviation, marine, pipeline, and railway accidents. And across all of these modes of transportation, the modal investigators were trying to look into fatigue's role in these federally investigated incidents and accidents, and they were struggling with writing it up in the report. And the way the TSB works is the investigative team writes the report and then hands it off to the 5-person board that acts as a review committee and then stands behind the report. So the board were saying things like, we think you've got it here, but you just haven't investigated it right or substantiated it well enough, and we're not comfortable standing behind it, so yank it out of the report. So they started looking around for somebody that could help. They found that I was doing some work in the fatigue and sleep world, and then recruited me. And I worked with them for about 5 years to redesign how they investigate fatigue, and then spent about 10 years working with them on their human factors team. And I think the experience at the TSB is and doing incident investigations is what led me to the expert witness world. Right. So here we've got a federal investigator that the federal government of Canada trusts. Why not use him in a courtroom setting? The cases I've done have all been around transportation incidents and accidents as well. So that's, in sort of a long story, how I got to that little title.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. It must be s- quite an honor to be in that area. Like I did a lot of research, looking around and research when we were doing our investigation into how fatigue impacts paramedics in Alberta. And like, there's not a lot of people like you in Canada. Even in the States, I could only find a couple. So it really seems like a highly specialized sort of interest and profession.
Yeah, there's a few people that I would trust to do this similar work as I do in Canada, a few in the States, and a few around the world. Now, there's because it's not a regulated profession. There's lots of people that will tell you they can do it, but if you look into their credentials or their background, they haven't got formal education in sleep and fatigue, the background that myself and my few colleagues have. So it's sort of a buyer beware world, and you have to do your due diligence, like you've found, to find the right people to trust. If you pick up a book on sleep, you can look like a professional pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But again, dig into their background and see what they're looking like. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You said that you sort of started out in dreams with an interest in dreams. One thing that I've noticed is um, when I become really sleep deprived, I have the most vivid dreams. It's a crazy phenomenon. I actually got to the point where if I'm sleep deprived enough, I'll actually know that I'm dreaming, and I can start to almost control the narrative in my dream.
Mm.
Where does dreaming happen? Is that because I'm like half asleep, half awake, or is that a deep sleep, or what's that all about? What are dreams all about?
So you're experiencing the dream pretty close to when you fall asleep. Is that when you're noticing it,
I don't
or
know.
is it throughout the whole night? It feels like.
It feels like throughout the whole night, but who knows? I'm asleep. But it just seems the
Yeah, it's
more
true.
the more sleep deprived I am, if I've been up 18, 20, 24 hours, that seems to be like when I have the most dreams, or the most memorable dreams, or the most vivid dreams. I don't know if that's how it is for other
Well,
people, but
yeah. So what tends to happen when you deprive yourself of sleep is that the subsequent sleep is usually a lot more efficient. So deep sleep is more profound, we say, and REM sleep can actually uh, it's, it's you can't call REM sleep deep sleep because it's not deep sleep, but it does kind of become, again, maybe the word is profound, or a bit deeper, or a bit more robust, shall we say? So you might actually be spending a little longer in REM sleep, which allows for these much more vivid and sometimes interesting dreams. Can I show you a quick slide to give you a bit of an idea of where dreaming fits in?
yeah, yeah, bring it up.
Okay, so let me show you. Okay, and for those audience members who are just listening to this, what I've brought up is what's called a hypnogram. A hypnogram is a display of one night of sleep with the stages of sleep separated. So you can probably see it at your end, Mark. What you're seeing here is 8 hours of sleep, and you can see it's divided up into stages 1, 2, 3, and REM sleep. REM sleep is when we do most of our dreaming. REM stands for rapid eye movement sleep, and they call it rapid eye movement sleep because in REM sleep you're absolutely paralyzed. You're atonic. There's no muscle tone left. So it's not like a tensed up muscle phenomena. You're just so relaxed you can't move. The only thing that can still move really is your eyes. So you see your eyes darting around quite a bit, thus the name rapid eye movement sleep. And this is where our dreaming occurs. You can probably also see in this graph of one night of sleep a bit of a U-shape pattern where you start off in light sleep, which is stage 1, then you go to stage 2, then you drop down to 3, then you go back up into the lighter stages, 2, sometimes 1, and into REM sleep. So this U shape is called one sleep cycle. And it takes about 1.5 hours or so. Now, this is a textbook hypnogram. We don't all sleep exactly like this, but if you were to have a perfect night of sleep, this is what it would look like. So when you're sleep deprived, your sleep becomes much more efficient. That is, there's less awakenings. Deep sleep is deeper. REM sleep is more profound as well. If it's more profound, it allows for longer periods in REM sleep, which then gives the phenomena of perhaps more dreaming or more vivid dreams. So that's perhaps an explanation for what you might be experiencing.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing because you can actually use this to improve your sleep. One of the treatments that we do for insomniacs is we call it sleep restriction. So there's this idea in okay, I'm gonna go back to your paramedicine training. Did they ever talk about homeostatic processes in the body where your body is trying to sort of maintain an equilibrium?
Get back to normal equilibrium. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So there's what we call a homeostatic drive for sleep, where the brain and the body pushes for its biological requirement per 24 hours of light. Most people need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So if you're not getting it, the body is going to push, body and brain is going to push you to try and get that. So the technique that's used with insomniacs is to use this homeostatic drive for sleep to make their sleep more efficient. So essentially you keep people, the insomniacs, sleep deprived day after day after day so that their sleep is much deeper, REM sleep is more profound, less awakenings, and then you slowly increase the quantity of sleep. So sometimes if you get really aggressive, you'll cut people off at about four hours of sleep a night. And then when it's really efficient, so they lie down, they fall asleep, they wake up 4 hours later, and obviously they're going to be fatigued, but they don't recall any awakenings, and they do that for a couple of nights. Then you slowly build it up again, adding 15 minutes until you get up to the proper complement of sleep for that person. So you're experiencing sort of a fun component of it, which is neat dreams, but you can also use it in a practical sense as well. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. I'll tell you though, man, I don't think I hit REM sleep when I'm on call. Like paramedics in Alberta, we still do the on-call thing now and again. And so we'll do like 96 hours on call, 48 hours on call, whatever. And I swear we don't leave stage one sometimes. It's like a pin can drop and wake me versus when I'm on my days off where as a good example, my kid last night knocked on my bedroom door, woke my wife up because he was puking, he was vomiting all night, and I didn't know any of it. She got out of bed, I didn't feel any of that stuff yet. I get when I'm on call, just a little ding on my cell phone from a text message or something, and I'm like shot straight up in the bed.
Yeah, I hate on call sleep. It's not comfortable at all, and there's very few people that can sleep really well on call. You talk to paramedics, doctors, nurses, anybody on pager duty, really, they'll tell you their sleep is the pits. I remember probably one of my first nights experiencing that was sleeping in a sleep research lab, and I was really excited to be in the sleep lab. Got myself all wired up, tried to get some sleep, and I felt like I didn't sleep a wink, tossed and turned all night long. And then the researcher came in the next day, who actually became a good buddy of mine. He said to me, "You had a pretty bad night of sleep, didn't you?" So you can tell when somebody is sleeping on call like that and has that on call sleep by looking at their brain waves. It's significantly different. Let me show you another slide, if you don't mind, of what possibly on-call sleep looks like from a brainwave perspective. So let me just show you this. So you should be able to see a slide on your end, Mark, that says stress and sleep. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, and again, for our listeners, what I'm showing is essentially a printout or a computer printout of a computer screen showing brainwave patterns of somebody who is asleep and is experiencing some stress during sleep. In the image, there are arrows pointing up at these little bursts of activity in the person's brain waves. So it looks like there's some sort of disturbance going on there. And this is pretty typical of a person who is on call or sleeping on call, in between the little bursts of brainwave activity, which we call arousals. Arousals are when your brain is bumped from a deeper stage of sleep up to a lighter stage of sleep. And it can be a really uncomfortable way of sleeping. Every time there's an arousal, your brain is disturbed. So what allows this to happen in the person who is on call is there's an area of the brain called the ascending reticular activation system, the ARAS. And one of the functions of the ARAS is to filter out unwanted stimuli. So you said, like, was it last night you said your kid knocked on the door and you didn't even hear him?
Yep.
So you were not on call last night,
nope.
Right? Yeah. So in your mind, or in your brain, that was an unwanted stimuli. Your brain probably recognized this as it's just my son, ignore it. If you were on call, that little noise could be your phone beeping, a text message, the phone ringing, or if you're working within a hospital, or maybe you're taking a nap in the ambulance, you're listening for all of these signs that give you the indication of time to get up and go, right? So this little area of the brain filters out these stimuli, but it also plays a big role in governing your state of consciousness. So it plays a role as gatekeeper. It says, hey, good stimulus, bad stimulus. If it's a good stimulus, or a noteworthy stimulus, it'd say, okay, now control state of consciousness, wake up and deal with this interruption, really. Yeah, so it's not a fun way of sleeping, but there's biological reasoning for why it happens.
Yeah, it's a good protective mechanism in ways, in some ways.
Yeah, of course. If you're sleeping in a new environment that you may or may not be safe from an evolutionary perspective, it's handy. You want to hear that saber-toothed tiger, scratching at the cave door. So it comes from a good place. It's just it doesn't really work with on-call lifestyles.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and for those listening, what the graph that you showed, what was the timeline on that graph? Was that a few hours or?
Yeah. Let me bring that back up again for our viewers, actually. So the timeline here is probably about 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds or so. So within that 30 seconds, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arousals. An arousal is different from an awakening. So you don't notice the arousal, but your brain is bumped up into lighter sleep. So you might be in, say, stage 2, stage 3. There's a little noise. You're bumped up into stage 1, and then it might feel like you're awake again, or like you've just had a crummy night of sleep. So imagine we've got 30 seconds, 5 arousals. Imagine that happening all night long. Your 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep happening repeatedly. No wonder it feels like a crummy night of sleep.
Yeah, no kidding. I thought this was like over a night's sleep or over an hour or something like that. And for the paramedic listeners, what it basically looks at is a ECG of VFib, and it's a nice fine VFib, and then periodically, almost cyclically, it goes into this coarse VFib, and that's where the person's sort of been aroused. And yeah, so it happens 5 times during 30 seconds. No wonder you wake up from a night of on-call feeling like you've hardly slept at all. And
yeah, and that's a really good comparison. We're not seeing VFib here, right? But what we're seeing is the equivalent in your brainwaves,
right?
Like a VFib in your brainwaves. Yeah. So imagine that's uncomfortable on your heart. Imagine uncomfortable on your brain and your sleep as well.
Yeah, no kidding. And now, I don't want to get too far into physiology, so pump the brakes on me if you have to. But every time there's an arousal during the night like that, does the brain sends signals to other organs to like release endorphins or neurotransmitters, epi or cortisol or something like that.
It's yeah. So let's go back to your schooling again. Remember the difference between parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system or components of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic is your sort of stress response. Parasympathetic is your what do they call it? Rest and digest response, so the relaxing response. So yeah, there is correlates in the other physiological recording parameters that we record in a sleep lab that indicate it's not just a brainwave change. There are other changes too. Increase in heart rate, changes in respiration, muscle tone increases. Yeah, so it's like a 1 second, 1.5 seconds, half a second bit of wakefulness creeping in numerous times over and over and over into sleep that you usually don't notice, but keeps you in a light stage of sleep. Yeah, really uncomfortable.
Yeah, no kidding. What's the longest you've ever stayed awake? Have you ever tried to test yourself, see how long you could stay awake?
Yeah, it's hard. I don't. So I have done on-call work in the hospitals, and it's not fun. But I've also done many overnight works. Being in the sleep world, you kind of stay awake while somebody is everybody else is sleeping. So it's sort of a bizarre thing. You're the person should know better, but you stay awake all night long watching these people sleep. I haven't been awake that long. I don't deal well with sleep loss. So I might have made it maybe 36, 48 hours max. Yeah. How about yourself? What's the longest you've done?
That's actually a long time. I think when I was a kid, like we used to do parties when I was a teenager and, drink pop all night and stay up late. And, when I was 10, 12 years old doing sleepovers and stuff, I'm sure I set some records there. But in my adult life, while working, I was awake for 34 hours one time. And at the 34th hour, I got a really terrible call where three people were driving down the highway on a quad, and they actually passed a minivan that was doing 90 kilometers an hour. So that tells you how fast they were going. And then right in front of that minivan, they rolled their quad. And
Oh,
yeah, so I was on it's funny because I updated my Facebook, and every once in a while the memory pops up where it says, been awake for 34 hours. Lord, please let me sleep. And like when I
yeah.
posted that, that's when the call came in. And so then I went and managed those three really high acuity patients. The two out of three were unconscious. The third one had a broken pelvis. It was a really messy call. The next ambulance was 50 minutes away, so me and my partner had to manage all three of them. But anyway, so I wound up being 7 hours on that call by the time we flew
Oh,
all the
wow.
patients out. Yeah, we had helicopters and fixed wing come in, and yeah, so it was a pinnacle moment for me, or a pinnacle day, because not only had I been awake for 34 hours, but then I had to do this really cognitively taxing job. And yeah, it was really a rude awakening, I guess, to fatigue and paramedic fatigue. I remember driving back from that call feeling like I was in a dream state. I felt almost intoxicated. I had like my peripheral vision was starting to like become foggy, and my thoughts were really unclear. It was a really strange feeling.
Yeah, when I'm thinking back to the times and when I stayed awake for long periods of time. Now I should preface it or clarify it. There were probably little bits of sleep creeping in to my wakefulness the whole time. We call those micro sleeps, right? So you're getting little bits of sleep which don't really refresh you, but it gets really difficult to maintain your state of consciousness. Um, let's go back to your situation because I think that probably illustrates a couple of really neat points here. Can you describe how you felt before getting that call? Do you remember back that far?
For the most part, what I remember is all of my muscles just feeling so weak I wanted to just drop. Like I physically felt, although I knew I was mentally tired, it was the physical fatigue that was really notable, I guess, at that time.
Okay. And then when you took the call and that period of stress, excitement, hyperactivity, how did you think you did perform during that period?
Well, surprisingly fairly good. I mean, once the anger settled and I realized I wasn't going to get to go to sleep, I
Yeah.
don't know if it's paramedics or if it's everyone, but you set a critical patient in front of me and you get that shot of adrenaline, that shot of cortisol, although over the years it's less and less all the time, but still it's like I can go into paramedic mode and there's not much that will distract me enough to really challenge me in my job performance. Although I do wonder if there was, if it was being videotaped, were there some, if I were to analyze it once rested, I bet there were some things in there that I could have done faster, I could have done better, or, you know, more
Yeah,
efficiently.
and this is what we find in urgent emergency situations, that excitement and stress can increase your performance up to more or less satisfactory levels. But there's always a risk in there, a greater risk of some sort of performance error that could end up being, devastating. And this is, I think, what people have to understand is sure, in most cases, you can probably perform well with a pretty significant degree of sleep deprivation. But the risk of not performing well is substantially increased compared to somebody who doesn't have that sleep deprivation. So do you want to accept that risk? Right? And this is what fatigue management is, or one of the big components of fatigue management is all about, is where's your risk tolerance? What a level of risk do you want to accept? And I would say that you're probably right. If we were to have videotaped your performance, there's probably areas where you thought you did okay, but in looking at the videotape, we probably said, well, you probably could have done this or that a little bit differently. You probably treated the patients quite well. But again, what if you made one significant error and then there was a devastating outcome from that? And that's what we're trying to really get at. Is it's a manageable risk. So why not manage it differently? Why not reduce that risk a little bit and not put people in a position that you had to find yourself in?
I remember driving back from that call. My partner was more rested than I was because they'd come on that morning and I'd been on all night, obviously. And I remember driving back, my partner saying to me, as I was like talking to her, debriefing from the call a little bit, I remember her saying to me, like, "You're literally slurring your words right now."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at that time doing some literature on sleep deprivation and reading some statistic about like so many hours of sleep deprivation is the equivalent of a blood alcohol value. I think it was like 18 hours of continuous wakefulness with a cognitive load is equal to zero point 0.1 blood alcohol level or something like that.
Not quite point one. Not quite point one. It's actually higher. So you have a pretty good memory of that research, Mark. There's a pretty robust finding that shows that if you're up around 17, 18 hours of wakefulness, many aspects of your performance are like you've got a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05%. So that's in many provinces in Canada, that's legally intoxicating.
Yeah, you get a ticket for that. Yeah.
You shouldn't be driving. You shouldn't be doing anything safety critical. And if you think about it, it's not really that long. Most of us, or maybe not most, but a lot of us are awake that long every single day. The trick here is looking at what are you doing when you're awake for that long. If you're sitting at home on your couch and you're lazy boy flicking the channel as well, who cares? But if you're responding to an urgent call like your colleagues and yourself, then we're getting into a high level of risk. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. We're a little backwards on that right now, I think, in paramedicine out here, anyways, because we have sort of a culture, and it's supported by some policy and things like that, where once you're have been working an extended amount of hours and you're starting to get into that fatigue world, they no longer send you things like routine transfers for appointments and stuff like that. They preserve you for only the most high acuity calls, the 911 calls, the most urgent sick high acuity transfers. And that almost seems backwards to the study, or to the science. It's almost like we should say, well, if you're starting to get high on hours and you're starting to enter that fatigue realm, you should only be doing, the scheduled dentist appointments and the diabetic foot clinic runs and things like that you can do fairly mindlessly.
So from being a fatigue guy, what I would say is don't do either one. Both have got their risks. In an emergent situation, sure, stress and arousal can bring your performance up a little bit. But I think, as you said, over the years, you get less and less stress, less and less of a reaction to these incidents because you're used to them, right? So you're not getting the increase in arousal that you need to fight the fatigue anymore because you're used to it. Yeah, I've seen another crash here, right? So there the errors are going to increase, but also for the person that still gets quite a rush out of responding to these calls, there's still an increased risk of a performance error of some sort that can hurt. Think of I don't know, maybe if you're administering medication of some sort in an incorrect dosage, how catastrophic that could end up being sometimes. Now, the other side of it is, so I kind of understand why they're thinking let's only give these really urgent calls to the people who've been awake for a long time, but there's risks there. The other side of it is the people who haven't become long on hours, and they're giving them all of these routine calls. Well, now you have essentially zero stress to fight any fatigue you might be experiencing. And what we find is that the more and more fatigued you are, the more sensitive you become to the more prone you become to errors because you don't have that stress there to keep you awake. So if you're a little bit fatigued, a monotonous task is still risky. If you're really fatigued, a really emergent, urgent task, stressful task is still fraught with risk as well. So really, I think you have to reduce those hours is what you have to do as a much better approach.
Yeah. It's interesting how paramedicine is fatigue is viewed in paramedicine. I have quite a few colleagues and friends who work in the fixed wing air ambulance world. And it's funny that they'll be like, "Oh, we gotta fly back to our home base because we gotta switch the pilots out. They're hitting their hours," and it's like that paramedic stays for days and days, and they just cycle through the pilots. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like this can at risk of sounding a little arrogant. Lots of times, paramedics we compare our sort of our cognitive load and what we're doing as a profession to like doctors or nurses, which I actually think is wrong, because we're so isolated and time is such a factor with us. I actually say our cognitive load as paramedics is closer to pilots than what it is doctors and nurses. We're very isolated. We are ourselves with our own hands. We're operating, troubleshooting, very highly technical equipment. At the same time, we're doing the patient assessment, drawing up the meds. That's med math that's getting done. We're doing a lot of different things. Not to mention we're operating a commercial vehicle. We're using specialized radio equipment, plus managing an entire scene, which can be very chaotic at times, but it's certainly uncontrolled. It's not a controlled environment, no matter what we're in for the majority. And so I say like the cognitive load and the processing of data that we're doing would be much closer to a pilot than it would be, say, a nurse working in a facility. And so it's funny that the paramedics on those airplanes are, sitting in the seat, doing this stuff, operating this equipment, caring for these patients, and we're switching the pilots out.
Yeah, it's, you've got this wax and wane of periods of intense activity and a bit of a lull or a slowdown. And that's very similar to piloting work, right? Especially if they're flying longer distances. takeoff and landing, super stressful. In between, not much going on. So I think you're right. The parallel is pretty interesting, where the cognitive load, the workflow is very similar. They're cycling the pilots in and out, but the paramedics are remaining on duty. So the cognitive load and the workload is cycling in a very similar fashion. And of course, just as safety critical, why are the paramedics still there? And it's a slow process to change the culture around sleep and fatigue. And a lot of that has still to do with not just the cultures within the industries or the different workforces, like paramedics versus doctors versus truck drivers, et cetera. I think it has to do with overall culture of continents, countries. So if you think about, let me put you in a little situation here. I use this oftentimes as a good illustration. Sunday afternoon, it's still summertime. The grass needs to be cut. You've got your to-do list on your refrigerator is like extended, a huge list. But everybody's out of the house, and you're feeling a little tired on a Sunday afternoon. So you lie down on the couch and you take a little nap. And then your husband, your wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, calls you and says, hey, Mark, you sound a little groggy. Did I catch you sleeping? What's the first thing you're going to say?
Probably yeah, or hide it and say no.
Yeah, most people, if you're comfortable with, not getting in trouble with your husband or wife for not doing your to-do list and taking a nap instead, pretty much, I was sleeping, leave me alone. But if there isn't that comfort there, or maybe it's a friend or somebody else calling you, most often people are going to say, no, I wasn't sleeping, no. When we should really be embracing that and saying, I'm prioritizing my sleep. This is what I'm doing to stay healthy and productive for not just the short term, but the long term here. So if we're fighting that culture, I've got, I think, another interesting slide, I think here somewhere. No, I don't have it. I was driving in the mountains of British Columbia, and there was not a lot of rest stops. I can't remember any. And then I came across this road sign that said, "Sleep is for sissies," on the road, like a provincial road sign that said that. And I thought, wow, this is a good example of the culture that we're still trying to fight. So if we all believe this, we have to change that culture as well as the cultures within our industries before we can expect everything to improve. Now, luckily, that sign was a sign for a restaurant called Sleep for Sissies, but still, people still had the idea that, oh, this is funny. Well, not in my mind, not really that funny.
And cultural change is so hard to make. I mean, I don't know if every profession is like paramedicine, but holy crap, to try and change the culture. Okay, it's not impossible, because the fact of the matter is, when I started in paramedicine, and I've been saying 15 years for a handful of years now, so I'm not too sure how long I've been in it, but greater than 15 years. And when I started, there was no cultural priority on mental health. It was faux pas. You didn't talk about it. If you complained about anything, you were told to get thicker skin. Maybe you're not cut out for this, that kind of thing. And I would argue that the cultural shift has happened now. And I worked like that for probably, 5 to 8 years. I think it took probably about 5 years for that cultural shift to happen, where we had the first few groundbreakers that started to change the narrative. And then slowly it moved into policies and research. And, now I think we've had a huge cultural shift where right in the education systems, in employers, we have had that shift. And I think that things like what we're doing right now is important, just to get the conversation going, because if we're going to see this change, it's going to take a few years.
Yeah, and as you said, it's probably taken a good 15 years for you to see some change on the mental health side of things. It's happening slowly on the fatigue side. Like when I first started, I think one of my first sort of paid speaking gigs was in the early 90s. And back then, so you being a medical professional, you've heard of the sleep disorder called sleep apnea, right?
Yeah.
So sleep apnea is when we have pauses in our breathing as we sleep, and it disrupts our sleep. When I first brought up sleep apnea in that one talk, I got a lot of sort of blank staring faces. Nobody had any idea what it was. And it was really hard to, get companies to pay me to speak. There was absolutely no interest in sleep and fatigue. It's changed now. I've seen a lot of changes really in the last probably 8 years or so now, where organizations are at least starting to consider it. I think opening up the concerns around mental health has probably helped with the fatigue side as well, because fatigue and sleep play a huge role in mental health. So it's opened up the ability to at least consider that we got to do something different with sleep and fatigue in our industries, our workforces. So, we're probably, if we take the mental health side of things, or mental health pattern that you saw, a 15-year change, we might be 3 or 4 years into it now. So we're talking quite a few years before sleep and fatigue are given the same level of importance as just general mental health. Yeah, it's going to take a while.
Yeah, no kidding. I got to tell you, you're talking about mitigating fatigue and gave your example of napping. Man, I love a good nap. I'm good at them. Took me a few years to get good at them, but damn, I'm good at them. What do you think of napping? Is it helpful, or am I on the wrong road here?
No, I'm with you, Mark. I love my naps. I don't take them that often, but when I do, they're pretty nice. So it depends. The short answer to your question is it depends what you're using the nap for. There's some really interesting work being done in the Canadian military where they've introduced nap pods. Have you seen these? Sometimes they're in airports. You can pay $1 or $2 and go and lie in this enclosed pod and grab a little nap as you're waiting for your flight. So the nap pod, some organizations, and one of which in Canada is the Canadian military, they're experimenting with the use of nap pods. The idea behind giving people an opportunity to sleep during work is to, for one, to prevent fatigue. So if you're going into a night duty, or at the beginning of the night duty or the middle of the night duty, you try and grab, 45 minutes, an hour and a half nap, and that'll keep you going a little bit longer. Or if you're excessively fatigued, you're already experiencing a fatigue, you use the nap as a countermeasure. A countermeasure is used to fight existing fatigue or fatigue you're already experiencing. So again, you grab a little nap and you're good to go for a little bit longer. Or in our regular lives, you're grabbing a quick nap to make up for a little bit of lost sleep that you've had already. I mean, if you're not already a little bit fatigued, you're not going to be able to sleep. So you're usually using them to catch up on a little bit of sleep. If you're using them daily, which is fine, providing you are not disturbing your nighttime sleep. So you're not snatching away nighttime fatigue by sleeping during the day, and then that messes up your whole night of sleep. So normally, you have to be really careful about introducing a daily nap. If it's used in the other two fashions as a preventative feature or strategy or a countermeasure strategy, that's great. The trouble that some organizations are running into, especially when they introduce napping and they give them these really comfortable nap pods to go and hide in and sleep for a period of time, is that sometimes people are using the sleep ability to sleep on the job to replace their nighttime sleep, or normal complement of sleep. So I've seen it in a number of organizations where people come in and they sleep for 4 or 5 hours during duty. Well, that means you're not getting enough sleep or good quality sleep. So you're replacing the sleep you should have gotten before work with sleep at work, which is taking advantage of the situation. That's not what it's designed for. So again, strategic use is good if you're using it to make up sleep that I've seen this happen in a number of organizations. Younger people entering the workforce love video games still. So they stay up all night long playing video games. They go to work. They've got a napping station. They go to work and they sleep for 4 hours.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the right use of it. So use it as a fatigue management strategy. Yeah, great. Used to take advantage of a strategy that is there. I don't agree with that as well. Physiologically, you got to think about, as I said, the effect it has on your normal sleep period. Taking a nap during the afternoon, every now and then, that's fine. If you're doing it daily, then you've got to think about, well, maybe I should be shortening my nighttime sleep a little bit to accommodate this afternoon nap.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. Sometimes I feel like if I nap too long, I wind up more groggy than if I'm not, if I have like a shorter nap. And I'm sure that that's very variable depending on what your day looks like and the night before and stuff like that. But is there a magical number? I've heard 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, less than 3 hours. Do you know any research behind that stuff?
So there's lots of research behind it. So let me tell you what you're experiencing first, and I'll give you maybe an explanation that might make sense of why you feel good or bad when you're napping for different times and different times during the day. What you're experiencing is called sleep inertia. Inertia means, what is it? Was it Newton or somebody that came up with the idea of inertia? Object in motion wants to stay in motion. So something similar happens when you're asleep. It takes you time to get into sleep. It takes your time for your brain and physiology to change. To get into sleep, it takes your brain and body time to change to get out of sleep as well. So you can't reverse it instantly and expect to perform at your optimum levels right away. Another word for it is called, sort of the colloquial way of describing it, is called sleep drunkenness. So if our listeners and our viewers want to actually experience sleep inertia, what they can do is this. The next time they wake up from a main sleep period, and if it happens at night, you'll experience it a bit more, wake up and say you have to go and get a glass of water or take a bathroom break. Don't turn on the light and walk to the bathroom with your eyes closed. And I can almost guarantee you'll be a little bit wobbly as you're walking. That's sleep inertia. You haven't regained full consciousness. Your body is still reacting to being partially asleep. Your vestibular system is not working perfectly. And there's all sorts of other functions that are being impacted as well, right? So the typical fatigue impacts on your brain function are things like slowed reaction time, poor problem solving, difficulty in paying attention. These all happen during sleep inertia as well. So that's a general explanation of why you experience these less than comfortable feelings, I guess, after having a nap sometimes. Now let me bring up that hypnogram again for those of us that are watching this discussion, and for those of you who are listening to it, I'll try and describe it again. So I'm bringing up the hypnogram image. Did it show up at your end there, Mark?
No, it hasn't. It's on screen share right now.
Oh, okay. So let me try this again. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. So the hypnogram again is the image of one night of sleep, and you've got these sleep cycles, these U-shaped cycles, where people start off in the lighter stage of sleep, and then they go down into the deep sleep, and then they come back up into light sleep. When you are waking up and feeling worse after a nap than say you were feeling before, you might be super fatigued. You lay down, you catch some sleep, and then you wake up and you feel, oh, geez, I feel worse now. There's a good chance you're waking up at the lower part of the sleep cycle, which is deep sleep. Deep sleep, if you look at the brain waves, eye movements, muscle tone patterns in people, it's the furthest away from the waking state of consciousness that you'll ever be. It's a very different state of consciousness. So if you wake up immediately from that stage of sleep, yeah, you're going to feel crummy. It takes a longer time to shake off that sleep than if you wake up from light sleep. So that's why you feel that way. That's what the phenomenon is, sleep inertia. So how do you avoid this, I guess, is one of the ways of looking at your question of, is there an optimal time? So the research, so the sleep cycle lasts about 90 minutes. And one sleep cycle is again, starting off in light sleep, going down into deep sleep, coming back up into light sleep. So 1.5 hours, you get all the stages of sleep, chances are, and then you wake up from light sleep. So a good recommendation is about an hour and a half nap, or a shorter nap, which wakes you up before you get into deep sleep. So you get a bit of stage 1, stage 2, and then you wake up. So some of the research shows that the sleep inertia, this sleep drunkenness, this bad feeling after napping, is worse for naps that are between 20 and 80 minutes long. Now, that's so that says, sleep for less than 20 or longer than 80. Now, that's based on research, which is in tightly controlled scenarios, likely done on people either taking naps in the middle of the night, who are nighttime sleepers, or taking naps during the day, who are also nighttime sleepers, or some sort of tightly controlled group of participants. Unfortunately, it doesn't occur that way in reality. It's really difficult to predict how long you're going to take to get into deep sleep. And I think you hit the nail on the head where you said it depends on what time of day it is, what's gone on during the day, the night before, how fatigued you are, all of these things. Let me just take a little jump back to your original question about what do I think of napping. So the idea of napping on duty in the aviation world, we call it controlled rest. We call it controlled rest because you have to have a policy and a procedure wrapped around this napping so that people understand the concept of sleep inertia, why it happens, and what to do to avoid it. Now, because it's so difficult to predict when somebody is going to get into deep sleep, some newer research shows that if you engage your mind and your body for about 20 minutes after any nap, doesn't matter how long, you should be good to go. You should have shaken off most of the sleep inertia. Your performance should be back up to probably not optimal levels, but a decent level. So when I'm working with organizations to implement a napping or controlled rest policy, and they're looking for, what's the exact time we have to let people sleep for? Is it 14.5 minutes and then we wake them up? Or is it 91.75 minutes? I said, forget about that. General rule is let people sleep as long as they operationally feasible, providing you build a process in at the end of the nap to get rid of sleep inertia or to help it dissipate or control it. Engage the mind and the body in some sort of non-safety critical activity for 20 minutes or so. So by engaging the mind, I mean, try and tell your partner, if you're sitting in an ambulance or lying in an ambulance, take a quick nap. Try and engage your partner in conversation that's non-safety critical or non-work related. Tell some jokes or tell a funny story or something like that. Or if you're alone, try and do some puzzles. A crossword puzzle is something like that. And at the same time, engage your body. You don't have to, do a hardcore workout, but simply rotating your arms, maybe some jumping jacks, walking around, and you should be fine. Yeah. So that's in a work context. Yeah. At home, well, maybe the best you can do is shoot for about a 20-minute nap or hour and a half nap, and just deal with the sleep inertia by engaging mind and body that way. Yeah.
So how quickly can you shake off that sleep inertia? Like, I hear what you're saying about like waking up and sleep drunkenness. I think fits perfectly. You wake up at 3 a.m. and stumble around. Whoa, where am I? It takes a minute to process everything that's happening. How quickly can you shake that off? Because in my example, I wake up like that when my radio goes off. I am engaging my body, I am engaging my mind, but there's no hiding the fact that I'm driving a vehicle within probably 70 seconds of waking up.
Yeah, and it is a little risky. Like if you look at what's going on in brainwaves and the physiological signals we monitor in the sleep clinics, it's a matter of 1 second, 2 seconds from changing from awake to, from a sleep brainwave pattern to an awake pattern. It happens really quickly. But if you do some complex analyses of the brainwaves, you still see sleep brainwaves embedded in the wakefulness brainwaves, sort of riding on top of them, which shows that it can last, depending on the person, it can last minutes, it can last hours, depending on the task that you're having them do. So how long does it take? It depends on the person. It depends on the sleep that they have obtained during the nap. It depends on the stages of sleep they've gone through. But waking up and driving right away, probably a little bit risky. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know that. I think it's good to be aware of it anyways as paramedics. The nice part is we're usually not doing patient care within 90 seconds, but we are, operating either our own personal vehicle to respond to the hall, or maybe if you're staying at the hall, responding the ambulance. So I suppose just being aware that, hey, you've got this level of sleepiness on top of your wakefulness, and you can shake that or help to shake a bunch of that off by get your brain working as much as you can right away, get your body in motion, which you're going to be doing to get dressed and get in the unit anyways. Yeah. So
and if we go back to the cultural side of things, one of the things I get organizations to look at too is, do you have enough people to do the work you need to do? If you're working at a station or a base, or you're taking a nap in the actual vehicle, the ambulance, can you have two people working at the same time? So that means one person can stay awake and be ready to drive, and the other person naps, right? And you can rotate and make it a little bit safer that way. A little bit more difficult if you are on call, napping at home on the couch, your keys and your uniform is on already, and you're ready to go right away. You don't have a partner at home that can drive you to work at all hours of the night. So a little riskier there. But if we can change the culture around sleep and fatigue, there might be other creative solutions that allow us to nap more safely,
Yeah. How do you feel, how do you feel? And what does the evidence say behind things like Red Bull and caffeine and, just using some of these, I don't know what you'd call them, performance enhancing, well, I guess not performance enhancing, whatever they are, stimulants. I mean, at the end of the day, they're all stimulants.
Yeah, and they do. I don't think your word there, performance enhancers, is incorrect. If you look at somebody who is fatigued and then who consumes caffeine, their performance improves. You see noteworthy and significant changes. So this is a perfect segue. Remind me to go back to our discussion about napping when we're finished talking about the performance enhancers. In most of these performance enhancers, and now we're talking about things that you can buy over the counter, like Red Bulls, Monsters, 5-hour energy drinks. I learned of a really interesting one just yesterday. I was talking with a caffeine expert, and she said there's these sublingual little sheets you can put under your tongue that have caffeine in them and dissolve, and caffeine gets absorbed really quickly that way. Most of the performance enhancing components come from caffeine. So if you read the ingredients of the energy drinks, they have things like taurine, B vitamins, all sorts of other things in there. But really what's having the effect on you is caffeine. So those are things you can buy over the counter. You can get medications through prescriptions that will help with alertness, but because they're not really accessible to you and I without a prescription, I generally don't talk too much about those, and they're usually meant to help with a medical problem, right? So there's one medication that is used for a disorder called narcolepsy, where people essentially have sleep episodes during the day. They lose muscle tone. All sorts of really interesting phenomena happen in narcolepsy. Well, interesting from a sleep researcher perspective, not that interesting if you're experiencing it. But there's a medication that can combat the sleepiness that these people experience during the day. But it's meant to solve a medical problem. In the operational setting, if you use caffeine wisely, it's a great strategy. Was first studied, I think, by NASA. There was a team many years ago called the Z team, Z for sleep. And one of the strategies that they studied in depth was, how can we use caffeine properly? So let me give you a couple of tips on how to use caffeine properly. So first of all, you have to keep your brain sensitive to caffeine. Like taking many medications, you can build up a tolerance for it. So if you keep it sensitive to it and maybe have, say, one pleasure dose a day and reserve the rest as a strategy, that's a good approach. And a dose might be about 100 milligrams, something like that. And just for sake of comparison, the standard sort of original Red Bull, not the the huge can now, but the standard one that came out originally, I think it had 80 milligrams of caffeine, so just slightly less than one dose. So for most of us who get up, we have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. That's great. Leave it at that, and then reserve the rest as a strategy. That'll keep your brain sensitive to caffeine. And then if we go back to the idea of fatigue prevention strategies versus fatigue countermeasures, to use caffeine as a preventative strategy, what you do is you look forward in time and you say, I think I'm going to be fatigued at, let's say you're starting a night duty that starts at 2300. Well, most people start to feel pretty tired around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's going to happen at that point. So you take some caffeine in before you become fatigued. That prevents the fatigue. The countermeasure use is, hey, I feel my head bobbing up and down, as you mentioned during your extended period of wakefulness. Your speech was slurred, so maybe you notice your speech slurring, or you notice some cognitive errors occurring. Well, you're probably fatigued, so you can consume some caffeine then, and it'll fight off fatigue. So in short, if it's used as a strategy, great, and the research shows that it's an effective strategy. It doesn't obliterate fatigue, but it kind of suppresses fatigue. It stops one of the molecules that signals to the brain that it's fatigued, called adenosine. Stops its activity in the brain because the caffeine molecule is very similar to the adenosine molecule. So it kind of blocks the pathway for adenosine. But that means fatigue is still in your brain, which means after you've processed the caffeine, adenosine rushes in and you feel fatigued again.
Yeah, now so time has passed, so you're probably going to be even more fatigued than you were previous to the caffeine.
Yeah. So then what you do is you stop and you get some sleep. You give your brain and body what it needs.
Yeah.
So we're going back to doses. A dose about 100 milligrams, and of course, that depends on the person. The recommendation is to never surpass 400 milligrams in a 24-hour period, and try and limit one dose to less than 200 milligrams. Right? So if you keep your brain sensitive to caffeine at 400 milligrams, max daily, you take one for your pleasure dose, and then you've got 3 more doses you can reserve for strategic use later on. And if you're using it every now and then like that, then great.
Interesting. That aligns really well with my experience. I used to be one of these guys who just drank coffee all day. There was always a coffee cup in my hand. And and then when I switched that from, limiting myself 2 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, it seemed to overall my energy levels improved throughout the day. And I also use sugar in it, so I'm sure there was some, insulin responses and stuff. And I certainly wasn't helping myself, but that's...
It's kind of an interesting phenomenon, right? You're thinking, well, more caffeine better. So why does less caffeine work better than more caffeine? The simple answer is your brain is more sensitive to it. Yeah.
Does
There's
the
also something called caffeine addiction, where your brain has now adapted to a high level of caffeine, and then you remove that caffeine and you get a rush of fatigue, right? So that phenomena can happen too when you get at the higher level of fatigue.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, I remember I said I wanted to come back to the discussion of napping.
That's just where I was headed.
Okay. So have you ever heard of the concept of a nappuccino?
No.
Okay. Nappuccino. So best solution for fatigue is to give the brain what it wants, brain and body what it wants, which is sleep, right? So by far, that's the best strategy, best solution. Second best is caffeine. So now if you combine both strategies, it's a pretty good solution as well. So the idea behind a nappuccino is you consume a dose of caffeine and you go to sleep right away. And then you wake up on the other side where the caffeine has taken effect and you've also experienced some sleep now. And this is not to be done for your normal sleep period. It's to be done to make your nap more effective. So if you've got the ability to nap during duty or take controlled rest, as we discussed earlier, bit of caffeine before the nap, fall asleep right away, wake up on the other side, you got some caffeine and sleep having its effect on you. So nappuccino, really good strategy. And the research says it works quite well too.
I like that. That's going to be a new thing. I like the, I think a great way to sort of start influencing the culture is to start with that controlled rest or controlled fatigue mitigation, which is, to me, it's a fancy way of saying we encourage you to nap, and then make it a nappuccino. I love it. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great way to work small changes into the organizational culture by introducing this strategy first, because there's so much attached to it, right? Like you got to know a little bit about sleep to understand why naps work. You got to know a little bit about circadian rhythms. You got to know a little bit about caffeine. You got to know a little bit about fatigue and performance. So it's a great way to start that conversation if you introduce napping or controlled rest first, then introduce the concept of a nappuccino, and it can really start that discussion off nicely.
Yeah. Do you know, I don't know if you've done any work in the facilities healthcare area or with the physicians. I know I was listening to someone else's, it was actually a physician podcast. It was a medical podcast, and they were talking about medical errors, and it was out of the States, but they were saying how the residents and students used to stay awake for, days and days at a time, just napping in the on-call room until they would basically crash, and their supervisor would send them home for a night's sleep. Do you know how they're doing it in Canada as far as physicians and student physicians are concerned?
Yeah, that culture is starting to change too. So my last review of the Canadian scenario showed me that the only place that had restrictions on physicians on call, and there's, this happens with probably with paramedic training as well. I'm sure you had to work a lot of long hours in nursing. Most medical professions where there's an urgent care component to it have got these long hours associated with it. But what I reviewed was physician hours. And the only place in Canada that restricted the number of hours an on-call physician could work was in Quebec, and it was only for the residents. That's it. Everybody else could work for 2 weeks in a row and be on call that whole time, and contributing tons of work hours to that. There was a medical conference for, I think, the administrators or the people who oversaw all the resident training for physicians in Canada, where they were introducing fatigue management strategies. I didn't get a chance to see all of the strategies. The only thing I was able to review was a document on sort of introducing this concept. But I know that they're looking at the hours of work not just for residents and physicians in training, but for all on-call medical doctors across Canada. So that's in the works for residents, but also for the well-trained physicians too. But my last review was it's still not in place. They can still work a whole heck of a lot of hours without any mandatory rest. Yeah. So it's a culture that needs to shift.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that like we won't let a truck driver drive too many hours consecutively without mandatory rest period because they might cause an accident. But, if you do survive that accident, you might be transported by a paramedic who's been awake for 20 hours and then put in the hands of a trauma surgeon who hasn't had a good night's sleep in 3 days. It's like...
it's a little bit backwards.
Yeah.
Now there's, if you dig into it, there's a few reasons that I think influence this. One of which is, if you put in a lot of hours up front, your reward is a lot of time off in between, right? So you work for 2 weeks straight, now you're off for 2 weeks. That's a pretty nice trade-off. So
yeah.
You're trading essentially sleep for time. And in the short term, well, you might get away with it. There might not be a lot of risks, or there's a lot of risks. There might not be a lot of negative outcomes. And that's the trick here, is to get people to look at not outcomes, but risk. So you're accepting a pretty high level of risk. Sure, it might not result in a whole heck of a lot of negative outcomes, but I guarantee if you were to do some advanced incident investigation on medical errors, you'll find a lot more related to fatigue than is being published or acknowledged right now. And what if one of those medical errors contributes to a few deaths a year? Well, it's avoidable, right? So change it up a little bit. But a lot of it is looking at the trade-off of risk versus reward.
Yeah.
Reward, lots of time off, more time with family. Risk, well, I've done it 100 times before and I've never killed anybody, so I'm willing to accept that risk again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I always challenge people who say, I've been working in this for 20 years and I've never hurt anyone. I've never made any major mistake. I've never killed anyone. And it's like, well, are you sure? Are you sure? Yeah. Maybe you haven't overtly killed anyone or anything like that, but if you're sleep deprived, like as a paramedic, if you're sleep deprived and you do make a small mistake without a negative patient outcome, but there is a small mistake. Maybe you gave a little bit too much pain control, a little bit too much fentanyl, and you had to bag the patient a little bit, and they recover fine and everything's fine. That's not a huge error, although it sounds probably like a fairly huge error to the lay person. But if you have to do something like that, and then you go, oh, well, this patient's tolerance was a little lower than what I thought it was going to be. It was an innocent error, no harm done. Was it really, or was it because you've been awake for 16 hours? And I don't think that because our culture is where it is, I don't think that we will accept that. A lot of people won't accept that yet as a possibility. And so we can say, oh, I've never made a mistake because of fatigue. I've never had a negative patient outcome because of fatigue, because we're not acknowledging it as an option yet. And I suspect that if we start acknowledging it as an option, we may go, there is actually mistakes happening out there.
Yeah. And two ways or actually one way I get people to acknowledge it a little bit more, or not people, organizations, is I say, let's look at your incident investigation process and whether or not you're even investigating fatigue properly. And, the method I help the TSB refine, if you're using that method of investigating fatigue-related performance impairments, accidents, incidents, you'll find the fatigue. But I would say 99% of organizations don't do a good job at looking at the possibility of fatigue. So I think you're right. Acknowledging it, and then looking into it, studying it, assessing your incidents to see, is fatigue actually playing a role here? The other point I bring up too with people, like you get this all the time. Well, I've driven home fatigued 100 times. I've never crashed my car. It's fine. I'm okay working for whole gobs of hours and then getting lots of time off. It's great. I'm trading sleep for time, and that's what I want. So then what I get them to think about is, okay, now let's think about the long-term health consequences. You're thinking pretty short-term, right? You're thinking in this next month, I work 100 hours and I get 100 hours off, whatever the numbers might be. Do this for 15, 20 years of a shift working career. And now let's see what the research shows.
Yeah.
And what it shows is mismanaged sleep, mismanaged fatigue over that period of time can contribute to some pretty significant health, mental and physical health consequences. Things like increased risk of Alzheimer's, increased cardiovascular risk, lots of research on shorter lifespans. So, then you think, well, okay, sure, you might get some extra time now, but don't you want to be here for a long time?
Yeah.
In which case, think a little longer term here. And don't you want to be healthy for that long period of time too?
Yeah, when we started doing our investigation into the effects of core flex, we actually commissioned a meta-analysis of the research that's out there. And we had a psychologist who sort of specializes in cognitive load and has a real interest in that area. And she did prepared a really good research paper for us, which is on our website. And yeah, it shows just like that. She pointed out the research that talked about increased incidence of sleep apnea, cancer, enlarged heart. Yeah, it was really something.
Yeah, if we go back to our earlier discussion or the concept of parasympathetic versus sympathetic arousal, cognitive load, sleep deprivation is a stressor. So it activates the sympathetic nervous system. So, chronic overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system never results in anything terribly good. So yeah, I'm not surprised at her findings too.
Yeah. There's two things I really wanted to cover off. We're getting somewhere with time here. We're getting near the end, but I wanted to cover off two things. I would like to end this with just some good, useful tips on how to create a good sleeping environment. But before we get there, we were enrolled in a study. We supported a study that was being done out of Calgary EMS, where they were looking at cortisol levels in people who were working sort of the 2 days, 2 nights, long shift change rotation versus people who were just doing all days and all nights. And I was wondering if you have any insight on that. Would it be better if we just had some paramedics who work all days and then other paramedics who work all nights? Or is this like 2 days followed by 2 nights? Where should we be pointing when it comes to this shift scheduling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You get that one all the time. So the old way of managing fatigue for shift workers and using scheduling strategies was to try and help people get their circadian rhythms adapted to the shift they were working. So essentially helping them to train their brain and body to feel that night was day and day was night, right? So if you're a night worker, what can you do to help your brain think that it's actually daytime? And in theory, that's a good strategy. Because it is possible. You take somebody into a sleep research laboratory, and within, if you tightly control all the biological time cues, within a week and a half, you can have their brain and body thinking that day is night and night is day. But the clincher here is that you've got to tightly control all of those time cues. In a practical sense, you can't do that, right? So think about the night shift worker. One of the strongest time cues is our exposure to light. And when a night shift worker is driving home, and especially in the summer, after a night shift, what are they exposed to? Sunlight. So it re-anchors your brain and body to think day is day and night is night. So it messes up that adaptation. Think about what you do, even if you're working, say, a week or 2 nights and you get a couple of days off. Well, most of us revert back to being awake during the day to get all these tasks done that you can only do during the day. So the concept was sound in theory, difficult to implement practically. It can be done, but you have to be extremely disciplined, and not many of us can be that disciplined, and not many of us have the training in all of the different time cues and how to manipulate them. So the fact that it's really difficult to adapt your brain and body to night work, coupled with the fact that there were some pretty significant warnings that came out quite a few years ago, one by the World Health Organization, that said that shift work is a likely carcinogen, and related it back to improperly managed time cues and its impact on a hormone called melatonin in your brain. And melatonin, when it's in your brain, signals that it's time to be asleep. So coupled with the fact that there's these long-term risks of constantly manipulating your brain's entrainment to day or night, they said, well, what else can we do here? Right? If you can't get the people adapted that way, well, what else can you do? So they then started looking at, well, what if we try and keep their brains oriented such that day is day and night is night? Does that help? And yes, it does help. So you see healthier people in the longer term. You see performance improvements. You see happier people. So mental health is greater as well. So if that's the better approach, then the shift approach that should match that is few nights in a row, get them off nights, let them recover, start the rotation over again. It's much better than staying on nights constantly, because you can't adapt to nights, right? So then then you have to build a whole set of strategies around, well, how do you get people to anchor their circadian rhythms to maintain this daytime orientation? And we can do a whole hour and a half on just on discussing that. But one of the great techniques to do that is to maintain a normal daytime meal schedule. So that is, eat breakfast at breakfast, lunch at lunch, and dinner at dinner. And that is a strong time cue to your brain that it's day is day and night is night. So that's one tip, and supports the idea that, or supports the strategy that less nights is better than more nights, essentially.
Since you brought up food, does a bigger meal empirically make you more tired? Like stretching out the stomach and that kind of thing. Is it better to eat smaller?
There's so it's better to have. I'm not a digestive expert, so I don't know the effects digestively, but from a what I've read about it, and then from a sleep and fatigue perspective, it's better to have your regularized meal periods rather than just snacking all day long. Right?
Okay.
But there's nothing wrong, from what I've read, about having slightly smaller meals and then supplementing in between those meals with small, healthy snacks. From a fatigue perspective, there might be a bit more what we call post-prandial sedation. So after prandial eating sedation that occurs after slightly larger meals. But then you have to look at, well, what's a large meal?
Yeah.
Do you have to stretch out the stomach? Is it just a sensation of bloating? Who knows? So the effect is pretty small. And I don't usually recommend it as a main strategy for managing fatigue. I usually just say, try and maintain your normal meal pattern. And then if you need snacks, take some healthy snacks in the middle, and convert to a really healthy eating pattern. And that's usually better than worrying about the size of the meal or exactly what you're eating.
Yeah, and it's hard for paramedics to do, but I think the key there is healthy. It's incredibly hard to eat healthy as a paramedic at night. It would surprise you how much of even the major cities shut down at nighttime. Trying to find yourself like a chicken Caesar wrap at 3 a.m. or something, it ain't gonna happen. You're stuck with like
No.
7-Eleven, McDonald's. I mean,
My
it's hard to
my
do,
healthy
but
my healthy snack on night shift was a can of Coke and Miss Vicky's chips.
yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
it's and again, that goes back to our discussion around culture. We don't support the nighttime workers that well with food and accessibility to healthy options. Yeah, so it is really difficult.
Yeah, and then I think then a person gets the sugar crashes and the insulin dumps and all that stuff, and carb loading, and which just converts to sugars and more sugar crash. Like it
Yeah.
just, it's a horrible thing. But I guess that's part of what we need to do, sort of from a personal responsibility aspect, is if you're going on night shift, you want to mitigate your fatigue, you want to be as high performance as you can be, you're just going to have to pack some nutritious snacks and proteins and stuff like that. But
Yeah, and if you're going with the idea of keeping your brain oriented to days and nights being for sleep, your choice of nighttime snack is a little bit important, right? Your stomach is essentially asleep. So you just said it, nutritious snacks that are easily digestible is the best thing for your nighttime eating. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the association needs to start lobbying the fast food industry.
Yeah, get some different food out there for the night workers. Yeah,
Yeah,
that would help.
keep your salad wrap and burrito shops open at night for us.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be helpful. Or in the hospitals, make sure the vending machines have got some better food in them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So let's talk about making a good quality sleep environment. Just like some good tips people can kind of take out of this to get a better night's sleep.
good. Yeah, I think a great way to end our conversation too, because it kind of pulls a few things together here. So, if you think about the best nights of sleep you've had and where they are, they're typically at home, right? So hotel sleep, if you're not sleeping in a hotel for weeks on end, it's not the greatest. Sleeping in finding a room in a hospital, falling asleep in the cab of an ambulance, not the greatest sleep. So you try and match the perfect sleep environment at home. Now, to improve your home sleep environment, you have to think a little bit physiologically here. What tends to happen in the middle of the night is our core body temperature drops a little bit. So a cooler room is better, but it's not keeping your whole body cold, because that would be uncomfortable. Keeping the blood in your brain a little cooler is important. So cooler is better. We talked about time cues impacting your biological rhythms, and one of the time cues is light. Light signals daytime, so dark environment is better. When we talked at the beginning about on-call sleep and noise disrupting your sleep, well, noise disrupts your sleep even if you're not on call. Right, that ARAS, the ascending reticular activation system, still has to do a bit of filtering of any noises that occurs. So less filtering that it has to do, better. So super quiet is really important. So we've got cool, quiet, dark, and slightly humid is a bit better as well. So we talked about sleep apnea really, really briefly. One of the treatments for sleep apnea, probably the best treatment, is to use continuous positive airway pressure. And for those of us, listening and watching, continuous positive airway pressure is essentially blowing a steady stream of air into the upper airway to keep the airway passage open. So if this is the airway passage, and for those of you listening, I've got my hands together. If you open your hands up by blowing air in there, you can always get air in and out. So it stops the pauses in breathing. The most comfortable CPAP units have humidified air. It's easier to breathe with humidified air. So if you keep your room slightly more humid, that's better, right? So the next question is, well, what if my room doesn't support all of these components of a good sleep environment? What can you do? So then you got to think a bit creatively about how you can fabricate these ideal sleep environments. So if it's not dark in the room, you can answer this, I'm sure, Mark. What can you do? Not dark in the room. What can you do to make it dark?
Yeah, darken those windows up.
Yeah, tint the windows, get some blackout blinds, wear an eye mask
Yeah, sleep mask. Yeah.
If it's not quiet, you can wear earplugs. Now the best type of earplugs. Well, let me go back to eye mask. The best type of eye mask is one that's comfortable for you. Sometimes the most comfortable ones are made out of I think it's neoprene, the scuba suits, and they kind of bulge out over the eyes, so your eyelashes don't touch the fabric and tickle you. But whatever's comfortable for you is the best. From an earplug perspective, the best ones are not the safety earplugs, the orange ones that you twist up and stick in your ear, because they go into the ear canal and then they expand, and that can be uncomfortable over hours and hours. So the best type is they're made out of like a silicone wax putty that you mold into the extra-auricular space. So you don't feel the ear canal, you feel that space around it. And they will normally muffle the sound well and get out or filter out most of the higher frequency noises. So you still hear a little low frequency rumble, which then means you can still hear, your baby crying sometimes, or the phone ringing, or your alarm if needed. So they're ideal. One of the most interesting ways of increasing humidity in a room, I heard from a group of railway operators, and in the railway world, they'll often hop on a train, drive it out to an end terminal, and have to stay overnight in a hotel or a bunkhouse, and then take the next train back the next day or next duty period. And oftentimes the hotel rooms or the bunkhouses are really dry. I don't recommend doing this, but this was this group of operator solutions. They would fill up their water bottles and just sprinkle water all over the room, into the carpet, on the walls, and everything. And over the night, this water would evaporate. Not the best solution. A better solution, I think the last time I saw it was full disclosure here, I'm not getting any kickback from Home Depot, but Home Depot sells this little personal humidifier where instead of taking your water bottle and spreading the water all over the walls, it gets inverted into this little container that pulls the water from the bottle and disperses it into the room. So a little personal humidifier. So that can help. Or if you're at home, you can buy one of these cold water steamers. That's great. And then, just be creative with other ways of fabricating that environment. If you don't like earplugs, then a fan blowing away from you can be soothing. Or you can buy a noise generator and block out unwanted noise that way. So we've got cold, or you open a window, cold, or cooler, quiet, dark, slightly more humid. So get creative with how you can fabricate that. And one last tip around that: if you want to reduce the effect of a poor sleep environment, or a novel or a new sleep environment on your sleep quality, that is, you have to sleep in some room in a hospital for a night, or at a hotel. See if there's things you can bring from your ideal environment that kind of trick your brain into thinking you're still in that ideal environment. So maybe bring your pillow, which has a particular smell to it. Bring your noise generator. Bring your little humidifier into that new environment, to reduce the effect of the novel sleep environment, that first night effect. That's really helpful. Make sense?
It's amazing the difference that it makes to take your home pillow, if you can, your home comforter. My wife has something to say about that, but taking your home pillow and I actually wear earbuds at night. It's probably not the best thing to wear, but I wear earbuds at night with white noise going into them, and it was amazing when I took the exact earbuds that I wear at home and my home pillow when I started working away from home, just how much it changed my ability to sleep in a different environment, whether it's a hotel or a station somewhere.
It does,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, so you're making your brain, you're tricking your brain into thinking that it's, well, I'm still sleeping at home. So it calms down the activity of that component of your brain that does the arousals and messes up your sleep. Yeah, it does work. Yeah,
Yeah, going into a hotel, I love all the big fluffy new pillows and whatever, and it looks really fun and exciting. But the fact of the matter is, dragging my lumpy old one from home, I'm gonna get a better sleep then.
yeah, that works best. Do that, your earbuds, and you're good to go. Yeah, the more
Yeah,
things you can make portable in your environment, the better.
yeah. Well, this has been great, Clint. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. We're gonna keep trudging on our trying to end core flex and getting rid of these 96-hour on shift patterns. But aside from that, people who aren't working that, just understanding how our sleep patterns work, how to get a better night's sleep, just having that higher level of being able to manage our own fatigue is so valuable. And I'm glad we're getting the conversation going. We do need a cultural shift in paramedicine and EMS specifically. So I'm so glad you came on and talked about it. It's great.
Mark, I want to thank you for bringing me on. Had a great time. Conversation was fun. I love sharing these tips too. And feel free to bring me on again. I'd love to chat with you again and share the message to the listeners and viewers. Happy to do it. Thank you.
That sounds awesome. All right, well, have a good what's left of the week here and into your weekend. And yeah, we'll be chatting again soon.
You too.
Hey guys, stick with me for a few minutes. I want to talk a little bit about CoreFlex and the lobbying that the association is doing to try and end it and why we're doing that. If you haven't checked out the fatigue work that we've done already, including the meta-analysis of the research that we've done in collaboration with the psychologists community, you need to go and check out our news feed. Just put in the search bar fatigue or core flex and it'll pop you up to all the stuff that we've been doing. Okay, so let me give you an example of a core flex shift for those of you who aren't really familiar with what the big deal is about it. So the most common core flex shift out there in Alberta right now is a 96-hour shift. That means you come on, you are scheduled for 96 hours straight with no scheduled rest period. You just do calls when they come in, sleep when you can, eat when you can. It's an old model. It used to be all over Canada. That shift schedule does not even exist east of Manitoba anymore. It's outdated. It was all right back in the day when we weren't looking for efficiencies out of the ambulance system. As an example, if you worked a core flex station back in the day that had maybe 2 units and did 125 calls a year, I give that example because that's where I started. That's the exact station numbers that I started with. Coreflex was pretty good because there was hardly ever more than 1 call a day. We didn't do things like flexing to other communities. We weren't in system status management, and it was very, very rare that you were fatigued on the ambulance. The problem is now in the new system that Alberta is using, we're moving ambulances all over the place. Call volumes have increased, resources are not growing, and so we're just too busy. And the model that Alberta uses of system status management is not built for CoreFlex. Now let me tell you how specifically we wind up with a paramedic who's been awake for far too long behind the wheel of an ambulance, or maybe even more dangerously, caring for a critically ill Albertan. So you arrive to work at 8 a.m., rested from your night's sleep before. Okay, this is your first day on. You walk in 8 a.m., you get signed in, you get your radio, you do all the stuff that you need to do to prepare for work, and now you're on duty, you're on shift. This is your first hour of your 96-hour shift. Well, you might do a little call in the morning of some sort, and then not a lot else happens during the day. You're doing a little bit of continuing education, maybe you update your registration, Maybe you take that opportunity to buy a membership with the APA. Okay, that was a selfish plug. But nonetheless, you're just doing little menial tasks and just trying to live your life until a call comes in. But on this day, a call doesn't actually come in until 11 p.m. So you lived your life, you lived your day as a normal human would, having slept last night as a normal human would, and now, just as you're getting ready to go to bed, a call comes in at 11 p.m. It's an emerge call, so it only takes you a couple of hours. So now it's 1 a.m., you haven't been to bed yet. So now it's 1 a.m., you get showered off after your call, you climb into bed, you fall asleep, 3 a.m., another call comes in. The radio wakes you. So remember, you woke up at 7 a.m. the day before to get to work on time, and now it's 3 a.m. and you're getting woke up again. But this time, it's something a little bit more egregious. This time, it's a red transfer that has to go into the city. And it just so happens that you're working 3 hours from the city. So it's going to take you a half an hour to load that patient. It's going to take you 3 hours to drive to the city and 3 hours to drive home. And then at least an hour to wind down, clean your unit, restock, and get back to bed. So let's do the math on that real quick. So you have been awake since 7 o'clock in the morning. By 7 p.m., you will have been awake for 12 hours. When that call came, you didn't get back to bed until 1 a.m. That's another 6 hours that you were awake on top of your 12 hours that you were awake. So that's 18 hours now that you were continuously awake before you actually got to go into your bed and go to sleep. But remember, you only slept for 2 hours, and now you have to start this 8-hour transfer. So now we're up to 26 hours of wakefulness by the time this red transfer ends. Oh, don't worry, you have a policy to support you now in calling in fatigue hours and saying that you're having micro sleeps and signs of fatigue, so you need to go off cart. Yeah, you can definitely do that. Of course, the downside to that is now you're shutting down that car for 8 hours so that you can get your rest period, and that community no longer has an ambulance. There is such thing as flexing, though, we're told. Not to worry. A neighboring community will flex in their ambulance. That is, of course, unless they're also on fatigue hours. Then there is no ambulance coverage for your community for 8 hours. But let's not bury the punchline here. The fact of the matter is, in this example, we had a paramedic not only driving an ambulance after over 20 hours of wakefulness, but in addition to that, just as scary or more scary, we had a paramedic in the back of that ambulance caring for one of Alberta's most critically ill and injured people, member of the public. And we know that because this was a red transfer. And so we have one person hurling a 3-ton vehicle down the highway at highway speeds after being awake for 20 plus hours. And then we have another one in the back doing a very highly cognitive taxing job, providing high performance healthcare and emergency medicine in a moving ambulance while trying to operate specialized equipment and troubleshoot that equipment and operate specialized radio equipment and doing drug math and everything else that we do back there independently, totally alone after being awake for 20 hours. And then after that, as a big thank you to those paramedics, when they get back to their community, they're put out of service for 8 hours so that they can sleep. And now the community pays the price by not having an ambulance available. Now, as ridiculous as this sounds, just viscerally, this sounds like a ridiculous thing. The fact of the matter is, it's also empirically harmful. As I said, you can go to our news feed and look at the fatigue study that we did. in collaboration with the psychologists. You can see that fatigue study, and you can see where we are actually shortening paramedics' lifespan by doing this. We're contributing to rapid spread of cancer, sleep apnea, obesity, heart failure, all sorts of things. But that doesn't even start to, well, okay, that's the most important to me, or at least one of the most important. I don't know, maybe this is all equally important. Let's not put importance heavier in one area or the other. This is another really, really important area to every paramedic out there. What about the risk to the patient? Do you really want a patient? Do you really want to be a patient to a paramedic who's been awake for 22 hours straight? And now you're in septic shock, and you're expecting this paramedic to do some sort of high performance resuscitation to save your kidneys, to save your life, to get your blood pressure raised. Like, it's unbelievable what those in charge of legislation and those in charge of ambulance operations are asking paramedics to do. We need to rise up against this as a profession and say no more. No more will we put our public at risk like this. We need to lobby the Alberta College of Paramedics and say you have a responsibility to protect the public. We literally have a paramedic driving an ambulance who's been awake for 26 hours. They know they're fatigued. You know they're fatigued. The college knows they're fatigued. Do you really want them meeting your spouse on the highway at highway speed when they're behind this giant unit that's hurling down the highway, and your loved one's on the way to work? Do you really want them going by them in the opposite lane? Hell no. I don't want them anywhere near them. We know there's a public risk. So who's protecting the public here? The legislators aren't. The Labour Minister was more than happy to sign a variance to sign paramedics out of the new safer work and family-friendly legislation. The Alberta College of Paramedics states that they can't step in on this because this is a workplace issue and they don't deal with workplace issues. Where's the unions on this? Where's the outrage on this? We've got paramedics contacting us all the time at the association talking about how terrible this is. Go onto Facebook, go onto social media, check out Twitter. You're going to see this all over the place. We have huge support in this. Paramedics know this is a problem. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Let me tell you what we are doing. So first of all, we are doing this right now. We are going public with this. We are talking about this. You've heard about it in the media. You're going to keep hearing about it in the media. You're hearing about it on this podcast. We've got the sleep expert. We know this is real. This is empirical. So we're going to the public with it. But not just the media. You see, people think many times going to the public means going to the media. The media can get some stuff done, but honestly, they're not the most effective. Where we're going at the association right now is we're talking to MLAs. We're talking to town councils. We're talking to counties. We're being invited time after time after time to meet with councillors, to meet with mayors, to meet with entire councils. MLAs are calling us for clarification, and we are telling them everything we know. We are sharing all of this information. And I'll tell you right now, communities and public have no idea that this is happening. People have no idea what kind of service they have to their town. I'll tell you, these small town mayors are some kind of pissed when they find out that their paramedics from their rural town get sucked into the city on a transfer. Okay, they don't mind that, but they get pulled into the city, bounced around the city a few times, doing emerge calls, things like that, hallway waits, spit back out to their community fatigued, and then they go out of service for 8 hours. That means that community didn't have a car all day, and now they ain't going to have one all night. They are not happy. And this is exactly what needs to happen. This is how you actually influence change when the change is political. You've got to get the MLAs, the counties, the mayors on the side of paramedics. And they do it not necessarily for the paramedic health and wellness and safety. That's why the association does it. That's our mandate, enhancing knowledge, skills, health and wellness of paramedics. We do it from the paramedic advocacy side. They do it from the community advocacy side. And so we pair up really nicely on this. And when you get organizations like the RMA, the rural municipalities, on board with this kind of thing, and they start really lobbying the government, that's how you move mountains. So let me just do a quick call out to you guys. Send your mayors our way. Send your MLAs our way. Ask them how, get them to ask the association how CoreFlex may affect their ambulance coverage to their community. Because I got to tell you, even if you don't have a CoreFlex ambulance in your community, you're still affected by it. Hell, I'll just say it flat out. The major cities in this province are affected by CoreFlex. Because the way this system is supposed to work is like a living, breathing organism. That's the way that I like to that's the way that I like to frame this up for lay people. Is to say, look, this is like a breathing organism where if a community gets short of ambulance service for whatever reason, if their ambulance gets tied up with a patient, that community can take a breath in and draw in ambulances from surrounding areas. Now, that may be a suburban community, that may be a rural community, or that may be a city. But whatever that community is that now has a need, it can take a breath and draw in an ambulance from another area. Well, that system is actually empirically proven. It does actually work. It's used all over the world. It's used out east. But here's the thing. That system doesn't work with CoreFlex in it. That system depends on ambulances being available, that when that community takes a breath in, there's actually a unit there to be flexed in. And that's not what's happening in Alberta right now. That's the risk to the community. The risk is when that community that loses its ambulance takes a breath in, the surrounding communities, they're already on fatigue time. So there is no coverage for that community. And this absolutely affects things like code reds in the city. Because CoreFlex ambulances, when it gets really busy in the cities or some of those suburban cities, small cities, when it gets really, really busy, the rural communities just cannot help those places out for very damn long. Because they go on to fatigue time, they get sent back to their community, and then they're either on fatigue and they'll only do emerge calls, or they go out of service entirely because they need to get some damn sleep because they've been awake for 20 hours now, doing cross coverage and emerge calls in other communities. And hey, that system can work just fine, but those people need to have a scheduled break. So what are we talking about in terms of a scheduled break? Is the association saying that every 24-hour car, 96-hour car, 48-hour car needs to go to 12 hours? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think there's all kinds of efficient ways of solving this problem rather than just taking it off the backs of paramedics. There's many models out there of mitigating fatigue in EMS, and those just need to be explored. Whether it's rolling 8-hour rests, like a rolling blackout when they're trying to save power, where maybe we have a scheduled 8-hour downtime in this community and our neighbor comes in, and then when we go back in, they have their 8 hours off. Maybe some of these crews where we've got rural stations that have 3 or 4 cars because they have a high transfer volume out of their community. Maybe all 4 of those cars don't need to be in service every night. Maybe we can resource some of those things and have more peak time cars. So everyone gets rest, coverage stays the same, no one gets laid off. That's not the way that this problem gets solved. This problem does not get solved by shutting down ambulances and firing paramedics. We do not have a problem in this province with too many ambulances and too many paramedics. So that conversation needs to go away. That's silliness. We need to have a real conversation about the harm that this does to the patients and the harm that this does to the paramedics. And it's not the responsibility of frontline paramedics to shoulder budgetary issues by sacrificing our health, wellness, and safety. That has gone on far too long. We've propped this thing up far too long, and people are exhausted. So, we're out there. We're talking to MLAs, we're talking to the public, we're talking to communities as they approach us. Send them our way. We're happy to talk to them even more. There is something that we can do. There is a study that we can do. Working with Clinton Marquardt, who you heard from today. Basically, paramedics would wear a wristband, and that wristband actually measures when a paramedic is sleeping versus when a paramedic is wakefulness. Hey, if you're a paramedic working in Core Flex in this province, you know damn well this happens. You know damn well this is an issue. If you're a paramedic who works Core Flex and you've never been on car awake for more than 20 hours, I'd love to hear from you because I don't think that exists. In fact, it's much more the other way. Like I said, you can just hit up social media, hit up our comments section under our news feed in this area of fatigue, and you can see all the comments from people who are awake an extended period of time. And if there's going to be an argument come out of the legislators or come out of the policymakers that this doesn't happen, paramedics aren't actually awake for 24 hours and driving an ambulance, we can do a study. It's about $10,000 just to get the study off the ground. But basically, we'll put wristbands on over 100 rural Core Flex paramedics. We'll measure their wakefulness and their sleeping patterns. That's probably a better way of saying it. We'll measure their wakefulness and their sleeping patterns. We'll graph it, and we'll see just how long those paramedics are awake until they get an 8-hour night sleep. And remember, during the podcast, Clinton Marquardt said more than 18 hours or more of wakefulness is equal to 0.05 blood alcohol intoxication. So if one paramedic one time is awake for 18 hours and either driving or caring for a patient, we have a major problem that demands a response from not only those organizations mandated with protecting the public, Alberta College of Paramedics, but also those public politicians who have been mandated with governing the way that ambulances operate and workers do their job in this province. I'm looking at the labor minister. I'm looking at the health minister. I'm looking at EHS. Okay, that's it. You could say I'm a little passionate about this. I hope you are too. If you weren't, I hope you are now. Let's keep the conversation going. You want to do the study? Do some fundraising. Let's do the study. What do you guys want to do with this? We're out there lobbying. We're trying to make the change. You can write the health minister. You can write the labor minister. This isn't an employer issue. If you guys are employed, whether contracted or direct, that's not where this problem lies. This problem lies much higher than that. It lies with legislation, and it lies in public protection. Paramedics were done a grand disservice when we were written out of the new safer work and family-friendly labor laws. That was a real injustice. Ambulance attendants, air quotes, are specifically mentioned in Alberta transportation legislation as being exempt. By the way, we're the only ones. So everywhere we look, we've got paramedics' health, wellness, and safety being sacrificed to prop up a system that chews up and spits out paramedics. And it's a legislative problem. So talking to your supervisor, talking to your manager, talking to your GM, it feels good, and that has some value to it. But they're not going to be able to do anything about this. We need to do this as a profession. We're the third largest health profession in this province, third or fourth. We have nearly 10,000 paramedics in this province. We can make this damn change. We need to be organized. We need to be strategic. We need to identify where the problem is, educate the people who are in the position to change it, and then lobby them to change it. And that's what the association's all about. If you're not an association member yet, run to the website and become one now. Because when I say we're the third or fourth largest health profession and we have nearly 10,000 paramedics, imagine what we could do if we all band together and lobby anyone, educators, legislators, mayors, operators, you name it. We have the largest base of paramedics in all of Canada, and we're the third or fourth largest health profession here in Alberta. We should be moving mountains. This should be no problem to get this legislation fixed. And the only reason it is a problem is because we're not organized. We don't have that fully unified voice here in Alberta like they do in other provinces and almost every other health profession, where they have an association with almost every single health professional in that association. We're strong. The APA is strong. We can move mountains, but they only move an inch at a time. Join us. Get behind us. Donate. Volunteer. Let's start moving mountains a mile at a time rather than an inch at a time. Okay, I'm playing myself out. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Thanks for listening to a bit of my rant here at the end. We'll chat again. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll catch you later.
Are you an association member? Not only does it support these podcasts, but you also add strength to the association's voice to advocate for paramedics. Association memberships include great discounts, free con ed, and liability insurance. For more information on membership benefits, please check out our website.